قد عظمت فللأمجاد بانيها ومن يسعى إلى العلي.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. Okay, so if you can turn to verse number 34, Surah Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 34. That's where we're at right now, inshallah. Okay. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا, O you who believe. Inna indeed كثيرا many من from al-ahbar, the rabbis, والرهبان and the monks. لا certainly يأكلون eat أموال the wealth الناس of the people بالباطل through falsehood. Wa and yasuddun, they are blocking on from sabil, the path of Allah, sabilillah. Walladina, and those yaknizuna, who amass or hoard al-dhahab, gold, the gold wal fidda and the silver. Wa and la, do not yunfiqunaha, do not spend it, fi, in sabil, the path Allah, the path of Allah. Fa, so bashir, give them. Bashir, home is them. Bashir, give glad tidings. So give them tidings. Be with or about adab, a punishment, alim, painful. Okay, let's do the verse 35 actually with it. Yawma, the day, yuhma, shall be heated up, alayha, upon it, fi, in. Now the fire, Jahannam. So Jahannam also refers to hell. So Nari Jahannam, the fire of hell. Fatukwa, so branded biha, yani shall be branded with it. Jibahuhum, their foreheads. Wa junubuhum, and their sides. Wa and zuhuruhum, their backs. Hada, this is ma, that which kanaztum, that you hoarded or amassed, li, for anfusikum, yourselves. Fa, so dhuqu, taste, ma, that which kuntum, you used to, taknizun, hoard or amass. So running translation for 34 and 35. O you who believe, many of the rabbis and monks wrongfully devour mankind's possessions and hinder people from the way of Allah. And there are those who amass gold and silver and do not spend it in the way of Allah. Announce to them the tidings of a painful punishment on a day when they shall be heated up in the fire of hell, and their foreheads and their sides and their backs shall be branded with it, and they shall be told, this is the treasure which you hoarded for yourselves. Taste then the punishment for what you have hoarded. Okay, verses 34 to 35. Really scary picture being painted about people who are overwhelmed and overcome by their greed for the wealth of this world. And this also, verse 34, also clearly teaches us, shows us, provides clear proof that the religious leadership of the Jews and the Christians was directly involved in corruption. So this is not, a baseless accusation. This is actually, there's evidence for it in the Quran that unfortunately, the Jewish rabbis and the Christian monks were involved in this type of corruption, in spite of their rank of religious leadership. So, along with having these characteristics, eating the wealth of people, unlawfully devouring their wealth, and we'll explain exactly what is meant by that in a minute. They would block others from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so these are the two crimes that they are being called out from the beginning of this verse, along with the hoarding and amassing is then mentioned later on. So As-Suddi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that the ahbar are the Jewish rabbis. The word al-ahbar in the Arabic, in this translation that you're looking at on the screen, it says scholars. So rabbis essentially are the scholarly class, the scholars of the Jews, and the ruhban are the Christian monks, right, the worshippers. So Ibn al-Mubarak rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions what corrupted the religion except kings and wicked ahbar and ruhban, meaning that what else was the source of corruption in the deen except for Kings, obviously, who were corrupt, as well as wicked, evil ahbar, evil rabbis and monks. And he also says, as for the kanz, which is mentioned here, kanz means treasure, and here it's used in the verb form, and it refers to that wealth, according to him, upon which zakah has not been made. Actually, this is the position of Imam Malik, right? So this verse is essentially warning against corrupted religious scholars, against misguided worshippers, reference to the monks. And what was going on here is that these people took advantage of their religious position, of their religious scholarship, of the trust that the people, the masses, had in them and in their knowledge, and they would use their religious status for worldly gains, to illegally devour the property and the wealth of the people. For example, the Jews, Ibn Kathir mentions this, they were respected, the Jews were respected by the people of Jahiliyyah, by the mushrikeen, and they would collect gifts from the mushrikeens, and taxes and presents were presented to them because they were considered the literate, scholarly class, the people of the book, and people who had knowledge, versus the mushrikeen who were aware of their literary ignorance, at least, right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ibn Kathir mentions, sent the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Jews continued in this behavior. They wanted to retain their status and position. They did not want to submit to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Part of that, along with the arrogance that they had towards the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, along with expecting the last prophet to come from among them and not from among the Arabs, along with that, what also was a factor in their rejection of the truth was that they wanted to hold on to this position of theirs in order to continue to benefit from a worldly perspective, to continue to get those financial advantages that they had become used to receiving. Okay, and Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala, he very clearly explains what is meant by how they devoured the wealth of the people unlawfully. He says they devoured the wealth of the common people by selling false decrees, yani false fatwas, we can call them, right? And he says by taking bribes, gifts, and presents on different pretexts. They invent religious regulations and rituals as tempt people to buy their salvation and fortunes and life from them, and make death and marriage dependent on the payment of due price. So they basically were charging for their religious services in a way that was false, in a way that they were benefiting financially from, regardless of the standards of truth that had been revealed in the original scriptures. The verses also mention the hoarding of gold and silver, which really exposes the vile, degenerative trait of greed. Note, of various evil traits, greed is that trait which is degenerative morally. That means it gets worse over time unless it is rooted out. It is something that has no end. It is that insatiable desire for dunya that cannot be satisfied, like an unquenchable thirst that only increases the more you drink. It's that type of desire and thirst. So yes, it's true that the human being, all of us have a natural desire for wealth, but when it becomes overpowering, when it overpowers one's obligations to spend in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to give in the way of Allah that which is mandatory upon us, that which Allah has designated, mandated for us, then that natural desire for wealth, which brings pleasure and is lawful as long as it is exercised within the balance, but once it takes away from the rights of others, when the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not upheld by spending it as He has mandated, then that amassment, that hoarding, that unlawful hoarding of wealth becomes a source of unbearable pain, as you see at the end of verse 34. فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. So then give them the tidings of a painful punishment. There's actually a hadith in Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, where the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that anyone whom Allah has given wealth, but he does not pay its zakat, then on the day of resurrection, his wealth will be presented to him in the shape of a bald-headed, poisonous male snake with two poisonous glands in its mouth, and it will encircle itself round his neck and bite him over his cheeks and say, I am your wealth, I am your treasure. Then the Rasul recited the verse from Surah Al Imran, verse 180. That means, and let not those who covetously withhold of that which Allah has bestowed upon them of His bounty, so on and so forth. There is another hadith in the Sahih of Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala, which says what means if any owner of gold or silver does not pay what is due on it, when the day of resurrection comes, plates of fire will be beaten out for him. They'll be heated in the fire of Jahannam, and his side, forehead, and back will be cauterized with them. Every time they're put back in the fire, they will be returned to him during a day whose extent will be 50,000 years, until judgment is pronounced on mankind and he sees whether his path is to take him to paradise or to hell. Note, this punishment is there even before the people are sent off to hell, whoever is destined to go there. This is the punishment that immediately begins for the people who withheld the zakah on gold and silver. Their punishment starts immediately on the day of resurrection, whose the length of which is 50,000 years. So this is an unbearable punishment. This is how we realize, that this zakah, giving the zakah, is a fard that has to be taken very, very seriously. We cannot be too serious or too careful when it comes to the payment of our zakah. And it becomes something that people are branded with on the day of resurrection, with heated brands, and thrown into the worst punishment. So again, one thing we highlight over and over again in our tafsir is how sin and its consequences are never ever worth it. The fleeting pleasure, if you just think about the consequence that it can potentially bring, the fleeting temporary pleasure, no matter how intense and great, is never worth the consequence. Okay, let's look at verse number 36. Verse 36, Inna, indeed, Idda, the number, Ashuhur, of months. Inda, with Allah, Ithna Ashra, 12 Shahra, months, Fi, in Kitabillah, the book of Allah, Yawma, the day, Khalaqa as-samawat, Khalaqa, He created as-samawat, the day He created the heavens, wal ard, and the earth. Minha, among them, arba'atun, 4 are hurub, prohibited or sanctified. Dhalika, that, ad-deen, the deen al-qayyim, the upright religion. So, la, do not, tadlimu, wrong yourselves, fihinna, in them, yani in the sacred months, anfusakum, yourselves. So do not wrong yourselves in them, in these sacred months. Wa, and qatilu, fight al-mushrikeen, the mushrikeen, and the polytheists, kaffa, totally or completely or comprehensively. Kama, the way, yuqatilunakum, as they are fighting against you, kaffa, in totality or fully. وَعْلَمُوا, and know, أَنَّا, that Allah, ma'a, with al-muttaqin, is with the muttaqin, is the people of taqwa. Verse 36. Surely the reckoning of months in the sight of Allah is 12 months laid down in Allah's decree on the day when He created the heavens and the earth, and out of these months 4 are sacred. That is the true ordainment. Do not therefore wrong yourselves with respect to these months, and fight all together against those who associate others with Allah and His divinity in the manner that they fight against you all together. And you know well that Allah is with the God-fearing. So if you look at the translation in front of you, and fight against the disbelievers collectively, so actually that's a better translation than what I had said, totally. Rather than totally, and collectively, all together. That is a better translation for that. So here in verse 36, the discourse shifts to the number of months which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designated to be 12 since the beginning of time, since the day He created the heavens and the earth. He decreed in a book that is with Him that the number of months are 12, in the year, 4 of which are sacred. And we know this from the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, from the speech that he gave on the occasion of his Hajj, on the last Hajj. The Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, which means, and this is in the Sahih Imam al-Bukhari, time has taken its original shape, which it had when Allah created the heavens and the earth. The year is of 12 months, 4 of which are sacred, and out of these, 3 are in succession, yani 3 of the 4 sacred months come one after the other. Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, that's the month we're in right now, and Al-Muharram. So these 3 are 3 of the 4 sacred months, and these 3 are in succession. So the month we just had before Dhul Hijjah was Dhul Qa'dah, we're in Dhul Hijjah right now, and after this will be Muharram. The hadith continues, and the 4th is Rajab, which is named after the Mudar tribe, between the month of Jamad al-Thani and Sha'ban. Then the Rasul asked, what month is this? We said, Allah and His Rasul know better. On that, the Prophet kept quiet so long that we thought that he might name it with another name. Then he said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, isn't it the month of Dhul Hijjah? Remember, this is going on, this is the speech of the Rasul in his farewell pilgrimage in the Hajjat al-Wida. So he said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, isn't it the month of Dhul Hijjah? We replied, yes. Then he said, which town is this? We replied, Allah and His Rasul know better. On that, he kept quiet so long, we thought he might name it with another name. Then he said, isn't it the town of Mecca? We replied, yes. Then he said, which day is it today? We replied, Allah and His Rasul know better. He kept quiet so long that we thought he would name it with another name. Then he said, isn't it the day of An-Nahr? So that was the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, in the day of Eid. We replied, yes. He said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and listen carefully, so your blood, your properties are sacred to one another like the sanctity of this day of yours, in this city of yours, in this month of yours, and surely you will meet your Lord and He will ask you about your deeds. And the hadith continues. So from this narration, we directly hear from the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam on the sacred nature of the months, that 4 months are sacred in nature. Fighting is generally prohibited in these months, which is part of holding their sanctity, and the Dhul Hijjah is one of those months. And by the way, the Dhul Hijjah is the month we're in right now. So in explaining the beginning part of this hadith, that time has taken its original shape, which it had when Allah created the heavens and the earth, and the year is 12 months, so on and so forth. Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala, he explains this, saying that this means that ever since Allah created the sun, the moon, and the earth, the new moon takes place only once in a month, meaning the year has always been 12 months long. Okay, that's the meaning of that. This has been mentioned. Now, why are we mentioning this? What does this verse mean? What is this verse telling us? Well, it's actually being mentioned here to refute the practice of An-Nasi, which we're going to see in the next verse, number 37. And that was a practice by which the mushrikeen, the polytheists, would play around with the sacred months. They would increase the number of the months to 13 or 14. And by that, they would add a month to the year in order to still have 4 sacred months in the year. So in order to refute that practice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the year has always been 12 months. You can't add another month and then say we observed a total of 4 sacred months, because what they would do is they would violate the sanctity of one of the sacred months and then make a non-sacred month the sacred month. So they were adding months to the year, and they would do this so they could continue fighting in the sacred month that would have been inconvenient for them to stop their fighting, right? And don't worry if you don't understand this, we're going to explain it further repeatedly, so inshallah you will get it. So again, what the mushrikeen were doing is that they would fight in the sacred month and add an extra month to the year, and then call that one the sacred months in order to quote unquote observe it, to make themselves feel like we still observed 4 sacred months in the year, because even they knew that the number of sacred months in the year was 4. Okay, so after willingly violating the sanctity of the real sacred month, they would say, oh, let's just add another month to the year, consider it sacred, no fighting, and we're okay. But in reality, they were changing the number of months of the year and making them more than 12, and that is not how Allah has decreed it. The verse also mentioned فَلَا تَظْلِمُوا فِيهِنَّ أَنفُسَكُمْ, right? Do not wrong yourselves in these months. Yani, by changing around the order, of the months, taking away the sacred nature or violating the sacred nature of a month Allah has decreed as sacred, and then fighting in it, what is that going to result in? If you think about the fact that 3 of the sacred months are in order, one is Dhul-Hijjah, right before the Dhul-Qa'dah, and right before Dhul-Hijjah is Muharram, right? So these 3 come in succession, with Dhul-Hijjah, the month of the Hajj, being in the middle, and the 2 months being between the time where the Hajj is offered. Now, in the past, it would take a long time for people to reach Hajj, to reach Makkah in order to perform the Hajj, right? So Dhul-Hijjah was preceded by Dhul-Qa'dah, which was declared a sacred month, so that people traveling for the purpose of performing Hajj, could safely make it to Makkah to perform the Hajj and not be threatened by fighting. So this is the wisdom behind why 3 of the sacred months are in succession. 2 of them are before and after the month of Hajj, which is Dhul-Hijjah, so that people could travel safely. And in this, safe travel, and ensuring safe travel by declaring the months before and after Hajj to be sacred, there was great khair for the people in this. They could safely perform their Hajj, and there were so many other economic benefits that would come to the people because of the Hajj season, the trade that we've already mentioned in previous lectures. So Mawdudi, he explains, فَلَا تَظْلِمُوا فِينَ أَنفُسَكُمْ, the part of the ayat that says, so do not wrong yourselves therein. He explains, and he don't let go, waste the good things that are coming to you by prohibiting the fighting in these months. Don't create disorder in these months and deprive yourself of the great khair that is designed to come to you by upholding the sanctity of these months, right? These months are for Hajj and for Umrah. Now, again, Hajj is very important economically, for trade, for the exchange of information. This is when all the tribes meet together. This is when they have, great economic advantages. So even the pre-Islamic mushrikeen, Arabs had prohibition against fighting in these months. So we're being told here that you're going to incur a great loss if you let yourselves fight and miss out on this great khair that is intended through upholding the sanctity of these months. And Ibn Kathir actually mentions all of this. I'll just read from him to summarize what we've just said. Ibn Kathir says, the 4 sacred months were made 4, 3 in succession and 1 alone, so that the Hajj and Umrah are performed with ease. Dhul-Qa'dah, the month before the Hajj, was made sacred. We refrained from fighting during that month. Dhul-Hijjah, the next month, was made sacred because it is the month of Hajj during which they perform the Hajj rituals. Muharram, which comes right after, yani Dhul-Hijjah, was made sacred so that they're able to go back to their areas, to their homes in safety after performing the Hajj. Well, what about Rajab? You may be thinking, Rajab is the 4th sacred month that is not in succession. What about that? Rajab, in the middle of the lunar year, of the Islamic year, was made sacred so that those coming from the farthest parts of Arabia are able to come at that time, perform the Umrah, and visit the house, and then go back to their areas safely. Now, we may be thinking, well, what if the other side initiated hostilities against the Muslims during the sacred months? Can you defend yourself? Well, that is why the verse makes provision for, and you may fight them, right? قَاتِلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ كَافَةً كَمَا يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ كَافَةً وَقَاتِلُوا, right? And fight the mushrikeen collectively as they fight you collectively. Yani, if they initiate the fighting in the sacred months, even though they are prohibited, then you can defend yourself. Then permission is granted to, in that situation. Now, what are some lessons that we can extract from this? Well, first of all, only Allah can designate certain times or places as sacred. We cannot designate or declare something as sacred. We cannot designate a certain time as sacred, or a certain month of the Islamic calendar as sacred, or a certain space as sacred. This is Allah's domain. And there's a beautiful statement of Qatada in Ibn Kathir. He records his statement where he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, injustice during the sacred months is worse and more grave than injustice in other months. Verily, injustice is always wrong, but Allah makes things more serious than others as He wills, or more sacred, we can interpret, right? He also said, Allah has chosen some of His creation above others. He chose messengers from the angels and from human beings. He also chose His speech to be above all other speech. He chose masajid above all other areas of the earth. He chose Ramadan and the sacred months above all the other months. Note, Ramadan is not one of the sacred months, but it does have a special status among the other months of the Islamic calendar. And of course, He chose the sacred months over and above the other months, right? And He chose Friday above the other days, and Laylatul Qadr above all the other nights. And He chose Laylatul Qadr above all the other nights. He gave Laylatul Qadr a virtue that no other night in the year has, right? Therefore, Qatada says, sanctify what Allah has sanctified, for doing so is the practice of the people of understanding and comprehension. So this is an important point to note, because we cannot say like the Nisfa of Sha'ban or any other time of the year, or any other space that Allah has not decreed as sacred. We cannot designate and declare things or times sacred of our free will, okay? Or that the saint is sacred, or this particular grave is sacred. This is not our domain. Sacred is only that which Allah designates as sacred. And I was reading an article on this topic which brought up a really good point, and I want to share a point from that. It says, what is most important is that a Muslim not treat the sacred months as the rest of the year. To distinguish specific acts of worship, their intensity and intentionality is to recognize Allah's glorification of the sacred months. Organizing our lives around the Islamic calendar is not simply another way to schedule time, but also an expression of our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is an article by Faraz Malik. He's a fellow at Yaqeen Institute. And this article I found very helpful in understanding how there is an attitude a Muslim is supposed to have towards the sacred months. They are different from the other months of the year because Allah made them sacred or more holy. And that directly means that sins are more serious in these times, as well as how good deeds have a greater reward in these times. So for us to know that and internalize that is an opportunity to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to capitalize on these months and on these times. These are ways Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has given us chances to come closer to Him and gain a lot in a little bit of space and time. So it's something really to be aware of, and it also highlights the importance of being familiar with the Islamic calendar. Sometimes you only know that it's July and it's also the Hijjah, right? And this becomes important for certain months like Muharram, for example, coming up very, very soon. It's going to be the next month of our Islamic calendar. And why is it important to know which Islamic month we're in? Well, for example, with Muharram coming up now, that is the month where, according to Hadith, fasting is the most virtuous. In the month of Muharram, after Ramadan, Muharram is the most virtuous month to fast in after Ramadan, out of all the months of the year. So it's only when we're aware of what month we're in and what virtues are associated with that month can we capitalize on that knowledge and exert ourselves by Allah's tawfiq. We can make the intention and then ask Allah for tawfiq for that. But if we're completely unaware of what month it is in the Islamic calendar, then we won't be able to take advantage of those special times that are there as an opportunity for us to draw closer to Allah, to gain more with little effort as compared to putting that same effort in the other months. Okay, Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Okay, let's look at verse number 37. إنما النسيء. Now this is the النسيء, or the intercalation, that is the way it's translated is intercalation. Okay, and we'll explain what that is. إنما النسيء, we alluded to it. It was basically the Arabs playing around with the year. What they would do is, declare a sacred month as an ordinary month, and so fight in it, or then add an extra month and increase the number of total months in the year. So this whole practice of playing around with the year for their own purposes and convenience is the practice of an-nasi, which is mentioned here in this verse number 37, and is translated as intercalation in the translation I'm looking at. In your translation on the screen, it says the postponing of restriction within sacred months is okay. So they have an explanatory translation here in verse 37, but regardless, we'll explain it inshallah. So this practice of innama an-nasi, indeed an-nasi, this practice of nasi, ziyada, is an increase fee in al-kufr, increase in disbelief. Yudallu, led astray, bihi, with it, yani causes the unbelievers, it's referring to the unbelievers, bihi yudallu, it causes with it alladina, those kafaru who disbelieve, yani to go astray with it further, or by it, they further go astray. Yuhallunahu, they declare it as lawful amman 1 year, wa yuharrimunahu, and declare it as unlawful amman the next year or in another year. Liwati'u, so that they can conform iddata, to the number ma, that habram Allah, that Allah has made forbidden. So the reason they did this was that, so at the end of the year, they still had a total of 4 months that they had observed as sacred. فَيُحِلُّ, but in fact what they're doing is, then they are making halal or non-prohibited ma, that which habrama, Allah has prohibited, habram Allah. Okay. Zuyina, has been made beautiful, lahum, for them, su'u, the evilness, a'malihim, of their actions. Wallahu, and Allah, la, does not yahdi, guide, al-qawm, the people, al-kafirin, the disbelieving people. Okay, so verse number 37. The intercalation of sacred months is an act of gross infidelity or kufr, which causes the unbelievers to be led further astray. They declare a month to be lawful in 1 year and forbidden in another year, in order that they may conform to the number of months that Allah has declared as sacred, and at the same time make lawful what Allah has forbidden. Their foul acts seem fair to them. Allah does not direct those who deny the truth to the right way, and Allah does not guide those who deny the truth to the right way. Okay, so here, verse number 37, the article actually that I made reference to has a nice definition for an-nasi. It explains it as the reallocation of sacred months for various motives. So that's a good, concise, comprehensive definition for an-nasi. But don't worry, we're going to explain it right now exactly what they used to do. What is an-nasi that is referred to here in verse 37, and how did the mushrikeen, the polytheists of Arabia, practice it? They practice in 2 ways, as Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala explains. We've already mentioned the first one, but we're going to repeat it. Number 1, they would declare a prohibited month to be an ordinary month in which fighting, robbery, murder, and retaliation was made lawful for them. Then they would declare an ordinary month to be a prohibited month, and a sacred month, in order to make up for the deficiency caused in the number of the prohibited months. Because remember, they even knew and believed you're supposed to have 4 sacred months in the year. Now, which was the sacred month they used to play around with? That was the month of Muharram. And you know Muharram is the first year of the Islamic calendar. After Muharram you have the month of Safar. Okay? Ibn Kathir mentions they innovated a change in the sacred month of Muharram, delaying it to the month of Safar, which is the month after Muharram. Therefore, they allowed fighting in the sacred month of Muharram, and made the non-sacred month, yani Safar, sacred. To make the sacred months in the year 4, right? So if you're curious, this in fact had been going on for several generations. And the last man to practice this was a man by the name of Abu Thumama Junada bin Auf. The Arabs would gather around him after the Hajj finished, and he would stand up and give a speech where he would sanctify or declare as sacred the months of Rajab and the Qa'dah and the Hajj. He didn't mention Muharram. So he would defer or delay the sanctity of Muharram to Safar 1 year, but uphold its sanctity another year. So, he did it sometimes. There was 1 year alternating where it was sacred and 1 year it was not sacred. He would do this so as to appear to uphold the number of sacred months that Allah had made sacred. So Ibn Kathir says that essentially he would allow what Allah had prohibited and prohibited what Allah had allowed, as we see from this verse. Okay, so inshallah now I hope it's clear after all this repetition. The other way they practiced an-nasi that Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala mentions in his tafsir, he says the other way of nasi was the addition of a month in order to harmonize the lunar with the solar year, so that Hajj would always fall in the same season and they would be saved from the bother and inconveniences and the inconvenience that are experienced by observing it according to the lunar year. Because if you observe Hajj according to the lunar year, what is that going to mean? It's going to mean that Hajj is going to fall in a different season every year, and that may not be very convenient for many people, in terms of the weather or in terms of harvest or crops or trade, etc. So he says, Rahimahullah, in this way Hajj was observed for 36 years on dates other than the actual dates. That is incredible if you think about it. They were performing the Hajj, but for 36 years the Hajj was done on the wrong dates. Yani not on the days of Hajj, but on dates other than that, because of this playing around with the sacred months. And he continues, rahimahullah, that the proclamation about the prohibition of an-nasi was made in Hajj, in the Hajj season, in the year 9th year of the Hijrah. Okay, so this whole Surah Tawbah that we're talking about right now, this surah, we mentioned the verses that were revealed in the 9th year of the Hijrah. We referenced that year as being the year of revelation for those verses of Surah Tawbah. And this is the same year, the 9th year of the Hijrah, is when an-nasi was made prohibited. It was declared that an-nasi is prohibited, and this prohibition was made in the 9th year of Hijrah at the occasion of Hajj. So after that, the following year, Hajj was performed on the correct dates. Okay, in the 10th year of the Hijrah, they were performed on the correct dates, and ever since that time until today, Hajj has been performed on the correct dates according to the lunar Islamic calendar. Okay, so we can make some very, very useful extractions here. If you look at this practice of changing the months haphazardly, declaring at will what is sacred and what is not, so they could fight their enemy whenever they wanted, or for whatever convenience that they wanted to preserve, right? This is described as an increased expression of kufr. Yani, this is an extreme expression of kufr, of disbelief. And it increased kufr in the sense that this changing of the sacred months shows that for them nothing really was sacred. They could toy around with anything regardless of how inviolable, how sanctified it had been decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it conflicted with their interests, then nothing really remained sacred, right? What is the lesson in this for us? When we change around Allah's decrees at will, when we play around with His designations, His prohibitions, His halal, His haram, right? When we designate those spaces and those decrees, because of what is convenient for us, because of what is in alignment with our desires, then according to these verses, wouldn't that be an increased type of sin, a more intense type of sin? Which is why, as we mentioned, sinning in these months, the month of Al-Hijjah, in the sacred months, is more serious than at other times of the year, right? And perhaps this increased sinfulness is because of the belittling of what Allah has designated as a sacred time. So when we act the same or sin in those spaces and times that Allah has sanctified, then that automatically increases the sinfulness of those acts, right? And just like the opposite would be true, whoever sanctifies and holds as great and exalts and honors what Allah has made prohibited, that is actually better for that person in terms of bringing them closer to Allah and increasing their iman, and it is a sign of the taqwa, of the piety of the hearts. And we learn this from Surah Al-Hajj itself, right? Verses 30 and 32. In verse 30, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَذِّمْ حُرُمَاتِ اللَّهِ فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِ. That, and whoever exalts or glorifies the prohibitions of Allah, then that is the best for him with his Lord. And also Surah Al-Hajj verse 32, ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَذِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. That, and whoever glorifies, sanctifies the symbols of Allah, so indeed that is from the taqwa of the hearts. So what we do and the way we behave in sacred spaces and times, and again, the Hijjah, the month we're in, is one of those, and the month we're about to go into, Muharram, is one of those, then this is actually a revelation, an expression of the state of the hearts. According to the level of taqwa of the hearts, will be that much sanctification and glorification of those times and spaces. So let's be cognizant of that in this month of Al-Hijjah, and cognizant of that in the month of Muharram, okay, inshallah. Okay, let's look at verse 38. Verse 38. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, ma lakum, what is it with you, إذا, when, qila, said, lakum, to you, infiru, go forth, fi, in sabilillah, the path of Allah, fi sabilillah thaqaltum, that you cling on, heavily cling on, ila al-ard, to the earth. Raditum, have you become pleased, bil hayat ad-dunya, with the life of this world, min al-akhirah, as compared to the next? Fama, so what, mata'u al-hayat ad-dunya, so what is the enjoyment of the life of dunya, fil akhirah, as compared to the akhirah, illa qalil, except a little bit. Verse 38. O you who believe, what is it? What is amiss with you? Yani, what is wrong with you that when it is said to you, march forth in the cause of Allah, you cling heavily to the earth? Do you prefer the worldly life to the next? Know well that the enjoyment of this world in comparison to the hereafter is but little, is very little, is very, very trivial. Okay, so this verse 38 onwards till verses 72 marks the second discourse that was sent down in Rajab, and also a sacred month, in the 9th year of the Hijrah, or a little bit before that time, when the Rasul ﷺ was busy making preparations for the campaign or the expedition of Tabuk. And we're going to explain later, shortly inshallah, what the expedition of Tabuk was. In brief, it was a military campaign headed by the Rasul ﷺ and thousands of Muslims that was fought or launched against the Romans. Okay, no fighting actually took place, but it was a military endeavor or expedition that the Rasul ﷺ himself headed in the 9th year of the Hijrah against the Romans. So in this discourse, the believers are being urged to actively participate, and they're being asked O you who believe, what is it with you that when it is said to you to go forth, يعني إنه غزوة التبوك, in this expedition which is called Tabuk, T-A-B-U-K, why is it that you're not going forth? Why are you holding on, clinging to the earth, weighed down, heavily clinging to the earth? Have you become pleased with this world over the next? Are you preferring this life to the next? What is this life compared to the next, except a little bit? Okay, so here in this particular verse, the believers, the mu'mineen, are being urged to prove their iman, to not let the difficulty of the task before them to go on and prepare themselves against the Romans, which was no small task. In fact, it was a very heavy thing. This is the first time that the Muslims were preparing themselves militarily against a non-Arab power, the Romans, which were not just a power, but the superpower of the day. So it was no small task, to say the least. But nonetheless, it was a task designated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you have a difficult task designated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then no matter how difficult it is, number one, know that it must be done. And number two, know that doing it will bring greater ease for you eventually, either in this life or the next or both. And not doing it will bring difficulty. Okay? So the ease that eventually comes, especially, in the next life, when we fulfill Allah's commands, even the difficult ones, that ease and that raha, that comfort, that delight, dwarfs all previous difficulties that are associated with tasks which are designed to test. And if you reflect on the nature of tests, don't they seem to have a timing about them? They're like a small window of opportunity. And Ghazwat Tabuk, this call to participate in going forward in this ghazwa, in this expedition, was no different in that it was also a test for which there was a limited time. And the timing of the window of tests is critical, because after that window closes, the opportunity that particular test provided for proving our love and our loyalty for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that also closes. At least for that test, right? So life on earth for you and me, it offers a variety of opportunities for rewards. And some of those opportunities for rewards are easy, like saying Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah. These are words, the time we have to say them are opportunities for getting rewards that inshallah we hope to see in paradise. And then life also has other opportunities that are difficult, that are not as easy as saying Subhanallah. And these are opportunities disguised, or these are tests disguised as opportunities, right? And these are difficult, but they are opportunities nonetheless. And once that test is over, that opportunity for amassing the reward associated with that particular test is also over. That closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that could have been attained by passing that test, that window, that particular window, also closes. Although, of course, the door of Tawbah is always open, right? The window of opportunity may close with that test, but the door to Tawbah is always open, right? However, a believer is one whose mindset is the one that wants to capitalize on every opportunity, whether it is an easy one or a difficult one, right? And it is tawakkul in Allah that gets us through that test, no matter how difficult it is. So every test is a chance to renew our tawakkul, our reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like when you think about the test that Ibrahim alayhi salam was tested with when he was thrown into the fire, right? Those moments before he is catapulted, or when he is catapulted into the fire, that time frame, and the angel is sent to him do you have any need? And he says that for you, no, there is no need. He only wanted to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He did not want to seek the assistance even of an angel, right? And then what happens? The difficulty and the heat of that test, the difficulty and the heat of that fire became a source of peace and coolness. So it is tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that transforms the difficulty and heat of the test into an endeavor that we can go forth into peacefully, right? With that, assurance of Allah being there. Allah has our back. Allah has my back. That confidence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that tawakkul that brings that ease and that coolness. It makes that difficulty easier to manage. What is inna ma'al usri yusra? With every difficulty there is ease. There is ease through difficulty when you have the correct mindset. And the greatest mindset, is developed or had through tawakkul, reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then being able to practically prefer, having the mindset that prefers the next world to this life, to be able to choose akhirah over dunya in times of test, right? To be able to choose and fulfill the great duties of iman when, the cause calls for that striving and for, standing and not sitting, and for striving, and not resisting the call, and to be able to strive with the self against, our lower tendencies. Now we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for afiyah. We do not desire to be tested. We do not ask for tests, but when they come, this is the mindset that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to have in those times, right? And when Allah says, have you become pleased with this world over the next? Have you preferred this world to the next? It's like asking, would you prefer to have, if you were offered property, if you were offered riverside or beachfront property, and you were asked, would you like to have a pond or an ocean? What would you choose? Would you like to have a drop or an ocean? What would you choose, right? And that's exactly the likeness of this world to the next, right? There's a hadith in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, which means that the life of this world compared to the hereafter is just like when one of you dips his finger in the sea. Let him contemplate how much of it his finger would carry. How much water can your finger deplete or take away or hold, from the sea if it were to dip his finger into the sea, So, subhanAllah, no matter how much you can amass from this world compared to the next, it is still little. And there's a beautiful narration from the Tafsir ibn Kathir about Abdul Aziz bin Marwan when he was dying, when he was in his last moments. He said, bring the shroud I'll be covered with so that I can inspect it. And bring me my coffin, basically. So when it was placed before him, he looked at it and said, is this what I will end up with from this life? Yani, is this it? Is this all that I'm going to end up with from this life, from the life of this world? He then turned his back and cried while saying, woe to you, O life, your abundance is truly little. Your little is short-lived. We were deceived by you. SubhanAllah, just this one statement, we could truly have a whole halaqah, a whole lecture just on this one statement. Your abundance is truly little. Yani dunya, even if it were to offer all of itself, it would have offered extremely little, right? And no matter how much you have and how much you amass and how much you enjoy, the only thing you walk away with in terms of material things of this world is that one coffin that we are buried in. So its abundance is truly little. And that little is short-lived. Even if you were to enjoy the whole world, and no one enjoys the whole world, not even kings can enjoy the whole world all the time, right? They have their the thorns in their crowns as well, right? But even that maximum, the best that dunya can offer, the greatest dunya can offer, even that is short-lived. We were deceived by you, right? Okay, we'll do one more verse 39 and then we'll stop, inshallah. إِلَّا تَنْفِرُوا, except that you go out, yani, except that you go forth, يُعَذِّبُكُمْ, you will be punished, or we will punish you. عَذَابًا, a punishment, أَلِيمًا, painful, وَيَسْتَبْدِلْ, and we shall change you, قَوْمًا, or we shall replace you with another people, غَيْرَكُمْ, other than you, وَلَا, and will not تَضُرُّوهُ, will not harm him, and this will not harm Allah, him, referring to Allah, shay'a, anything at all, wallahu, and Allah, ala, upon, kulli, everything, kulli shay, each thing, qadir, all powerful. Verse 39, if you do not march forth, Allah will punish you grievously and will replace you by another people, while you will in no way be able to harm him. Allah has power over everything. Yani, if you don't march forth, illa tanfiru, if you don't go forth, if you don't do what Allah is telling you to do, then remember, you are not indispensable. Maududi comments, Allah's work does not depend on you, and it is not that it will not be accomplished, or it will only be accomplished only if you do it. It is Allah's grace and bounty that He is affording you, giving you the golden opportunity of serving the cause of His way. Therefore, if you miss this opportunity because of any foolish assumption, Allah will raise another people and bestow on them the opportunity and capability of doing His work, and you will be the losers. Allah does not need us, we need Him. If we don't do the work, if we don't do Allah's work, if we don't work for His deen, He will replace us with other people. He will honor another people who He chooses, and they will do it. Allah does not need us. We are not indispensable. Yani, we are dispensable. We can be replaced as Allah wills. Remember, it is Iman that makes one precious in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the willingness to then prove that Iman through our actions, through our practical choices and services to and for His deen. So once one is not fulfilling the dictates of this Iman and refusing Allah's call, then we can easily be replaced. And if you think about where a mu'min, a believer's self-esteem comes from, self-respect comes from, where does the dignity, the izzah of a mu'min comes from? It comes from their obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, upholding the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world. This is where our sense of confidence, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that we are comfortable and confident and feel that our dignity is in obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is what makes us precious in Allah's sight. And those are the people that work for Him. Those are the people that Allah preserves them, and inshallah grants tawfiq to work for His cause. Now, this does not mean any type of self-admiration. No, it is not a self-admiration that we should develop on account of working for Allah's deen, but it is rather a commitment that we should have to work for Allah's deen in order to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and uphold His words in this world. Okay. So inshallah, with that we conclude today's session. We will see you next week, inshallah, with verse number 40. I'm sorry, I don't have time for question and answers. I have my guests that have just arrived upstairs, so we'll just pause here and continue, inshallah, from verse 40 next time. Subhanaka wa bihamdika la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
قد عظمت فللأمجاد بانيها ومن يسعى إلى العليا بما فيها ويبني مجده جدلا فروح الفاتحة ليصبح